Good morning, Seven City Church. I am so excited to be here with y'all this morning. My name is Ashley. Real quick, before I get started, I just want to give honor where honor is due. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for allowing me the opportunity to be here with y'all this morning. If you don't know, my dad planted this church, so this is like his second child. So thank you so much for allowing me to be up here speaking today. I'm so thrilled. But real quick, let's just open up with a word of prayer. Lord, I just thank you for this day. I thank you for this time to be here in your presence. Lord, I pray that you'll just use me as your vessel today, Lord. I just pray that every word that comes out of my mouth will be of your spirit, Lord, and not of the flesh. Pray that you open our ears to hear you, our hearts to know you, our minds to understand your word, and our mouths to speak your word. And in your precious name we pray. Amen. So this week we are continuing on y'all's series, Facing Everyday Fears. But today I wanted to focus in on the fear of losing control. So today we're going to be in the book of Esther. Now, I don't know about you, but for me personally, I am a type A person, Enneagram 1. I really like to be in control. I like my everyday planner. I like our calendar that's on the fridge that tells us what we're doing for the week. I like our weekly meal plan. All right, I like to be in control of things. If that is not you, if you are loosey-goosey with your schedule, God bless. Because my word, I don't know how you do it. But I think we can all be honest with ourselves that we like to be in control at least a little bit in our life, right? Whether it's through your calendar planning and all that, or maybe it's through the TV. You like to control what you're watching. Maybe you like to control where you go to eat at in the evenings. Maybe you like to control your schedule or other people. If you have children, you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you wish you could control other people a little more, like your boss or the people on I-35. But nonetheless, I think no matter what, we can all say and we can all agree that we like to have some control over our life in some way. So what do we do when life feels completely out of control? And today we're going to be looking at Esther and a little bit of background on Esther. Esther is in the Old Testament. And during this time, she is a Jew, and the Jews were in exile. And so some of them had made it back to their homeland already, but many of them were still in exile, and they were living in Persia. And that's where our story is taking place today. Now, the king of Persia was King Xerxes, and he was very excited during this time because he was celebrating his 3-year anniversary as king. And to celebrate, he was not just going to take a little vacation or take a little bit of time off. No. He wanted to show off his splendor to literally anyone with ears to listen for 180 days. I don't know about you, but I don't want to see somebody's accomplishments for 180 days. That's just a little excessive. But that's what he did. So for 180 days, he's showing off all of his splendor to everyone who will listen. And then, because they have nothing better to do with their lives, for the next 7 days, he throws a huge party for all of the men in Persia and all the men who work in the castle. And they can do basically whatever they want. In fact, in Esther 1:8, it says, "And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king has given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired." So we can kind of see where this train wreck is headed, right? All the men are together. They're all drinking as much as they like for a week straight. Yeah. While that party's happening, though, Queen Vashti is over here having her own little get-together with the girlies. And so basically all of the women in the palace who belong to King Xerxes and Queen Vashti, they're all having a little party. And what that means was all of the king's concubines. All right? So the tea at this party is hot. All right? Now back to the king. Obviously, very drunk. Doesn't really know what he's doing much at this point. He's with his buds. And he orders Queen Vashti to come into their presence and entertain his guest. Not with music, not with art, but with her body. Now, I love the queen here because she's like, hard pass, actually. I will not be doing that. I will not be taking my clothes off to entertain your buds. That's going to be a no for me. And I love that because I'm like, man, yeah, you go, girl. She's got it. But women had literally no rights. So there was a bit of an issue for that because the king is so flabbergasted that she said no to not only her husband, but also the king himself. And so he calls forth all of the wise men, and he's like, what do I do? My wife just told me no. Because, God forbid that a woman has an opinion. But the men that he talks to, the wise men, are like, well, we cannot allow this to happen. Because if the queen is denying you, then other women will hear about it, and they'll deny their husbands. That would be nonsense. Load of nonsense. So what does the king do? He banishes his queen. He banishes his wife for not obeying him. He says, you cannot control your life, and you must obey whatever your husband says. Talk about having a fear of losing control. Sure, the queen didn't have any control in her life, but the king feared losing control so much that he banishes his wife and his queen. Now, maybe you're sitting there thinking, okay, Ashley, that's a bummer, but it's not 478 BC anymore. We're in 2025, women have kind of worked our way up a little bit more. We got a ways to go, but that's another story for another day. And you may be right, okay? We are not really introducing our wives into the room with all of our drunk friends and telling them to get naked for them. You're right, we're not really doing that. But we can still have a control issue in the same way that the king did. Have you ever tried to control how your kids act in the presence of company? Or have you ever had a boss who was a micromanager? Have you been the micromanager? What's been the punishment for those that didn't do what you commanded them to do? Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that we have to have safety procedures and rules in place and boundaries to keep everyone safe and to keep companies running. I get that, and I'm not dismissing that. But we do have to navigate whether our rules are for the safety and the good of others, or are they just a rule to make us feel powerful? And after the queen was banished, King Xerxes wanted a new queen because he was like, oh, wait, now I'm bored. So in Esther 1:2-3, it says, the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this pleased the king, and he did so. So let's take a moment and look at this. What is this saying? It's saying that he sent out all of his servants to capture all the super young and beautiful virgins in the land, come to the palace, sleep with the king, and whichever one performed best in bed, he'd make his wife. That is exactly what it sounds like. That is modern day sex trafficking. And again, we are seeing this cycle of needing to be in control. It wasn't about who was going to be the best wife for the king. It wasn't about who could help rule Persia best. It was simply about being able to control somebody else that would please the king the most. But remember, when humans create ashes, the Lord can turn it to beauty. And through this process, Esther is chosen. She is chosen to be queen. Now remember, Esther is a Jew. And Jews are in exile, okay? She is being raised by her cousin Mordecai because her parents have already passed. And in fact, her original name is Hadassah. But Mordecai feared that if the king or anyone found out that she was a Jew, that she would probably be killed. So Mordecai gave her the name Esther because it was more of a Persian name, and it helped her to blend in better. So Mordecai is working at the palace at this time as a gatekeeper. And he would often go and check in with the eunuchs who were over Queen Esther, and he would ask about how she was doing and things like that. And in Esther 2:20-23, it says, Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So let's get this straight. So basically the king, nobody in the castle knows that she is a Jew. All right, that is still a secret hidden to them. And in those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry, and they sought to lay hands on King Xerxes. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. And when the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged in the gallows. So Mordecai still had a sense of control over Esther at this time. Even though she was queen, even though really she was the one who could have been commanding him things, she was still obeying what Mordecai was telling her to do. But Mordecai's control wasn't to form chaos. In fact, it was really to help her, because he wanted to help her, Queen Esther, understand of any chaos that was happening within the palace walls that would have harmed the kingdom or the king or Esther. And so when Mordecai would come to Esther with something, she would tell the king about it, and they would approach the situation as needed. And perhaps your fear of losing control is similar to Mordecai's, where you want control over those that are higher than you, but it's for their good. Think of it this way. If you go into work and your boss is like, hey, listen, I know I'm never here, but I have all these new plans and policies that I want to implement into your department. And they don't ask you like any of your advice, right? And you're looking over those plans and the policies and you're like, that's not going to work. Like you can just already start to see it in your head and you're like, you want to, this isn't going to turn over very well. And maybe you're very fortunate and have a wonderful boss. And so you're able to go to your boss and be like, listen, I know you're trying to help and I appreciate the help. I don't think that this plan's going to work too well. Here's why. But I have another plan, and I think if we implement this, it might work out a little bit better for the company and for the department. And so what are you doing in that moment? You're learning to lean on each other. Both you and the boss want control over that department. You want to have some control over the situation. But you're having to lean on each other to help each other control the situation. And in the same way, Mordecai is having to trust that Esther will take his advice and take what she has heard from him and deliver that advice to the king to keep her and the king safe. And not long after this time, a man named Haman was promoted. And he was promoted above all the officials and the servants in the palace. And he commanded all of them to bow down to him anytime he was there. He's not even king. He's like second in command. But I mean, you do you, bro. So all of the officials are bowing down to Haman as he's walking through, except for Mordecai. And when he's asked about this, he's like, well, I'm a Jew. I'm not bowing down to you. And that's that. But this infuriated Haman. In fact, so much so that Haman decided he wanted Mordecai dead. But not just Mordecai. He wanted all of the Jews dead. And Haman's pretty sneaky, and he tricked the king into signing a decree stating that every Jew would be killed if they refused to bow down to him. And so in Esther 3:13, it says, letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Haman had a fear of losing control of his power over people. Ever felt that before? I don't know if you have a teenager, and you know how teenagers are. Sometimes they believe they just like know everything in the world, right? You tell them, go clean your room. I know. You need to do this. I know. Yeah, we've heard it. And you might feel like in these parenting years that you're maybe losing some of your parenting control. Or maybe you can think back to the time when you were the teenager and you knew everything and you were testing the limits of your parents' parenting control. Sorry. I know I did that a few times. It's fine. Or maybe you have those obnoxious neighbors. You know the ones with the really loud music, the ones who put all the things out in their yard. And you're looking at it and you're like, well, if they don't clean that up, this place is just going to be a load of nonsense. And you just feel like if they continue down this way, the neighborhood's not going to be what you anticipated. Maybe you're the HOA Karen. I don't know. But after this decree was made, the Jews that the Jews would be put to death, Mordecai comes to Esther. And when Esther heard of the decree, Mordecai has asked her to go to the king and plead for her people, plead on their behalf. But there was an issue. There was a rule, pretty big rule, that nobody was allowed to enter into the king's presence uninvited, or else they would be put to death. And this included the queen. So Esther's over here like, bro, I am going to die if I do that. No. But Mordecai responded to Esther in Esther 4:13 through 14. He said, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this." So what is Mordecai telling Esther? He's telling her that, listen, if you don't approach this situation, there will be consequences. Mordecai believed that the Lord would still deliver the Jews. He said, if it's not going to be by you, Esther, it's going to be by somebody else. And if you don't help, there will be consequences for you. You are not safe inside of the palace just because you are queen. What I love about the story of Esther is that God's name is never mentioned throughout the entire book. It's never mentioned, and there's no record of God speaking in the entire book. But yet it's so evident that he is present, that he is there, that he is working in Esther's life. And Esther responds to Mordecai in Esther 4:16. She says, "Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So what's Esther's response in her moment of losing control? She turns to the Lord. She asks for every Jew to fast and to pray with her. And she understands that her calling is in the Lord's hands, not in hers. And she is willing to die for that. And often we fear losing control because we don't know what the outcome will be if we're not in control. But the truth is the Lord is meant to be in charge. And if the Lord is in charge, his outcome will always be greater than anything we could anticipate. And after 3 days, Esther appears before the king. And it says in Esther 5:2, "And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. And he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter, and the king said to her, 'What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to half of my kingdom.'" So get this picture. Esther has just entered into a space that is forbidden. She has entered into the king's presence when she was not invited. She should have been put to death. But the king saw her and is like, "What you want, girlie? You want half my kingdom? It's yours. I'll give it to you. If that's your desire, take it." This is crazy. I love it. You can see how the Lord is protecting her. He is wrapping himself around her. He is guiding her. And in that moment, as Esther is protected by the Lord, she invites the king and Haman to a banquet that she has prepared for them. And they come. And again, while they're at this banquet, the king is like, "Girlie, what you want? You want half the kingdom? It's all yours. You can have it." Like, I just picture him with like the little heart eyes, right? Just kind of how he is. And in this moment, Esther gets a little nervous again. And she's like, "Come to another banquet with me." And they're like, "Okay." And so she prepares another banquet for the king and for Haman. Now, let's take a look at this, though, from Haman's perspective. Haman is on cloud 9. He is thrilled. Like, imagine going up to your friends and they're like, "So what'd you do this week?" And he's like, "I just had a banquet with the king and the queen, and I'm going to another one tomorrow." Like, yeah, you're the talk of the town, bro. But even on his cloud 9, Mordecai still refused to bow down to him. This angered Haman so much. In fact, it angered him to a point that he could no longer contain it. And he's at home and he's venting to his wife and to his friends. And his wife is like, just have him killed. Go and have a gala made for him. Hang Mordecai tomorrow morning before you go to the next banquet, and then you can enjoy it. But how do you know that when the enemy has a plan for you, the Lord can certainly intervene in unique ways? So that same night that the gallows were being made for Mordecai to die on in the morning, the king is struggling to sleep. And so the king orders for the book of memorable deeds to come and be read to him while he tries to go to bed. This is basically like the equivalent of a bedtime story or a sound machine, okay? And so while the servants are reading him this book, they come across the deed of when Mordecai saved the king from the 2 eunuchs that were trying to kill him. And all of a sudden the king is like, whoa, Mordecai, huh? Did we ever thank him? And they're like, no. He's like, oh, my bad. Now, I don't know. If it was me, if somebody had saved me from like my coworkers trying to kill me, I'd probably be thanking them every day. But we listen and we don't judge. And at this moment, Haman is coming to the king to tell him that he is hanging Mordecai in the morning. But before he can get any of those words out, he comes in Esther 6:6-9. It says, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? That's what the king is asking Haman. And Haman said to himself, oh, who the king would delight to honor more than me? And Haman said to the king, for the man who the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So what is Haman doing in this moment? He is setting what he thinks is for himself a big party. He's like, I'm about to be honored throughout the entire town. Everybody, including Mordecai, will have to bow down to me. And I love this next part because in Esther 6:10 it says, hurry, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. And you cannot convince me that the Lord does not have a sense of humor after this whole passage, right? Because Haman is like, he has thought he is setting his party up for success. And then the king hits him with, yeah, do all that for Mordecai, right? Like your arch nemesis, your worst enemy, him. That's who I want it done for. And in fact, even Haman's wife knew after this that Haman was in trouble. Because his wife says in Esther 6:13, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Even Haman's wife understood that there was something special about the Jews, that they had something special that nobody else could explain, and that Haman was going to fall at Mordecai. And again, Haman is at the king's banquet the next day. He's with the king and the queen, and they're over there, and the king is like, my queen Esther, what do you want? You want half the kingdom? It's yours. Just take it. I promise. But Esther responds in Esther 7:3-6. She said, then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss of the king. And then King Ahasuerus, which is also King Xerxes, just different name, said to Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? Who has dared to do this? And Esther said, a foe and an enemy, this wicked man Haman. And Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Haman was later hung on the gallows that was intended for Mordecai. And Mordecai took Haman's place in the palace. Now, had Esther allowed her fear of losing control to dictate her decisions, She never would have appeared before the king. She never would have saved the Jews, and Mordecai would probably have been dead. But fear is often associated with pain. So we're looking for that pain point. And for Esther, it was probably the fear of death. Appearing before the king unannounced or uninvited would have led to death. That is certainly something to fear. And for Mordecai, it was probably the fear of seeing his people back in captivity. See, Mordecai being a Jew, it was most likely that his grandparents were the ones who were originally exiled. And he had this fear of seeing the Jews go back into that captivity. And yeah, some of them were still in captivity and they were seen as less than, but he had a fear of them being completely demolished and wiped out. For Haman, it would have been racism. He feared his people group not being in control and that the Jews would rise back into power. That's why he's so insistent on Mordecai bowing down before him. That's why he was so insistent on exiling the Jews. And the king's pain point would have probably been being seen as weak or an incompetent ruler. This is why he showed off his splendor for 180 days. This is why he reacted so harshly to Queen Vashti when she said no to him. He felt that if he could not even control his wife, why would people expect him to be able to control a whole nation? He feared being seen as weak. And perhaps you fall into one of these categories of fear. And maybe you fall under King Xerxes' category, where you fear the appearance that you're giving off. You're not sure if it's the right one, if you're going to fit in just right. Maybe you're more like Mordecai, and you can see the pieces of the puzzle and where they probably need to be placed, but you're not able to control them. And so you have to rely on other people to put those puzzle pieces together. Or maybe you're like Haman. You fear of losing control of the people around you, but it's leading to drastic consequences for you and for those that you love. Or maybe you're like Esther, and you're fearing the worst. But the way that Esther handled her fear, that's what changed her narrative. Because when you fear losing control, we have to remind ourselves that we were never meant to be in control. That is the Lord's doing. The Lord is meant to be in control. And if we can hand that control over to him, he will change our story and he will make it beautiful. He will do a wonderful work in you, but you have to lay it at his feet. Sometimes we're going to be asked to do things that are outside of our comfort zone. They're outside of what we want to do. Maybe you're placed in a situation that is something where you're having to trust blindly. But if it's the Lord's will, if it's the Lord who's asking you to do these things, we can trust and we can have faith that it is good. It is a good plan that he has, and he will walk us through it. And in Zechariah 4:6, it says, "Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts." When the Lord called my husband Dylan and I and our family to Temple a few years ago, I had felt like, personally, I had lost complete control over my life. I knew what the Lord was saying. I knew that he was guiding us to Temple. But I was 3 months postpartum, and I had an 18-month-old. And we were moving away from our family, our friends of 20 plus years. I was leaving a job that I loved, because I loved being a kids pastor here. And we were entering into a very new season, and I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And I remember pulling the car up to our house, our new house, that we had never seen because COVID wouldn't allow us to go and see it in person. And I walked in, and I was by myself. And I fell to the floor in a panic attack. And I remember quickly a friend that was helping us move pulled up, and he comes inside, sees me on the floor, and gives me a big hug, and is like, "It's going to be okay, it's going to be okay." And I was very thankful for friends and family that helped us move on that day. And they were able to talk me down, kind of help me get grounded again. But that was tough. That was hard. And there are still tough days. Don't get me wrong. We have a great church that we attend that my husband is children's pastor at. We really enjoy our friends there, but we miss the comfort of Fort Worth. We miss being able to drive 10 minutes to see my parents or to see some old friends. I miss the days when I could sit in a familiar coffee shop and order my usual, or get a good burger because Temple has really garbage food. And they have a really bad variety of restaurants. But that's my flesh trying to stay in control of my life. And when we can allow the Lord to take control of our lives, it will probably look different than what we expected. It will probably cost us more than what we wanted to pay. But the outcome will always be greater than anything we could have anticipated. And I'm not sure where you are today. Maybe you fear losing control. Maybe you're in that right now. You're in that storm. You've already lost control and you're not sure what's next. But what's your pain point? What's causing you to fear this loss of control? No matter the situation, I want to encourage you. Give it to the Lord. Trust that He has a plan, that He has a purpose, and that He will walk you and guide you through it. Remember how I said that He was silent in the story of Esther, but He was still present. That is still true today. Sometimes the Lord is silent in our situations, but that doesn't mean He's not present. He will still guide your path. He will still lead your way. But before we can ever give anything to the Lord, we have to first ask ourselves, is the Lord of our life? And so if you'll bow your heads in respect of privacy and for those around you,